All right. Welcome back to the Hogtown Podcast, episode 40-something.
No, it's 49.
49. This time with our friend and planner, Blair Scorgie. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, guys. So good to be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming. So you, of course, are an urban planner. You're the managing principal of Scorgie Planning, a firm that you started, and I think have kind of like developed a reputation as being very plugged in on working files specifically, but also on like the broader policy questions,
Right.
Many of which we discussed. So maybe we could start there. Like what sort of work you started the firm, if I remember right, under 2 years ago?
Coming up on 2 years in kind of May. So yeah, between a year and a half and 2 years. Actually sort of informally launched my practice at the Missing Middle Summit.
That's right. Yeah.
So that was very
good
exciting.
opportunity. Yeah.
It was a great opportunity. So I guess in terms of what I do, it's a mix of things. I do largely development approvals work in the city of Toronto.
Yeah.
That's probably about 80% of the work that I do. The remaining 20%, I work with municipalities, executing public sector contracts for things like secondary plans or urban design guidelines. So I'm working on, as I think you're aware, in your, not too far from home, I think the Guelph Street Corridor secondary plan in Halton Hills, among other things. But a lot of the work I do is private land development. A lot of that is in the city of Toronto. And most of that is sort of at the low to mid-rise scale. I do I'm going to T-Lab shortly on an application for 2 garden suites in one structure. I've worked on some laneway suites. I've got
Can you say where that one is? I'm trying to track all the 2 garden suites in one.
It's on Coxwell Avenue.
Yeah.
I just saw the one that I think Greg just posted about one that got approved yesterday.
And then Greg did one on 91 Barton.
That's right.
So we're starting, but you still have to go to T-Lab, which
still got to go to T-Lab. Yeah. And there's actually only like a small handful of variances. Like it's not a lot, but I think it's really just
it sets precedent that the city doesn't want.
Yeah. And it's vertically stacked. It's not like they're side by side.
Right.
Yeah. But so working on a couple, laneway suites and a few multiplexes. But a lot of what I do these days is small scale apartment buildings, like 6-story wood frame. All of my projects are purpose built rental.
Yeah.
No, not surprisingly, all leveraging MLI Select.
Yeah.
And, on major streets. And so like between 30 and 60 units typically, although I have had a couple that are like 10 units.
Yeah.
Specifically with the intent of like bypassing site plan control, going straight to building permits.
Yeah.
So I've had a few of those that are like walk-up apartments, 10 units. And that's kind of one scale, but a lot of them are kind of like 30 to 60 or 40 to 60, depending on your pro forma and what pencils, right?
Yeah.
And it's really exciting. It's exactly the kind of stuff that I think we should be building. And a lot of those files for me are in kind of the quote inner suburbs.
Yeah.
I'm working on several sites in Scarborough. I had a site in East York, in conversations with some clients about some sites in Etobicoke, that kind of stuff.
The benefit of nice big lots on major streets.
Yeah, exactly. And, and a housing stock that's maybe nearing the end of its functional life, and like we're talking about mid-century bungalows.
Totally.
On wide lots, right?
Yeah.
It's like easy pickings. And there's a lot of those sites, too, which is amazing.
The challenge we find with those sites is what rents can you get without parking? Because often with this scale of project,
parking is so acute.
Yeah, that's a challenge.
It's a big factor on your site plan, right?
Thankfully, we no longer have minimum parking requirements, but then it's like a market driven, like, do you need parking? So
how far down Kingston Road could you live without a car?
Yeah. And if you're working in an area like, say, Scarborough, most of Scarborough is actually exempt from on-street permit parking. Like there is.
Oh, interesting.
And so you can only park for 3 hours on the street. Some of these areas, the transit infrastructure is still evolving and growing. Even if you're close to the crosstown, say you're on Pharmacy Avenue, north of the Hydro Corridor, you're still like, it's
a hike.
It's a hike, right? So, it's psychologically a difficult thing for people to get beyond too. And that extends to, the Committee of Adjustment members. It extends to the local politicians. It's even difficult on some of these sites to fit visitor parking.
Because
they're tight sites.
Yeah.
So, and you can't, you don't really want to be backing a car up onto Warren Avenue either, right?
No,
like there's no space for turnarounds.
Yeah.
So anyway, those are challenges.
Back to your practice, we were chatting about this before. I think one of the catch-22s of people in your position who are now making a name for themselves is you're getting really, really busy. The best planners in the city are overwhelmed with demand. Which is a good problem to have, I guess, as you're building your business.
It's a great. If there are always going to be problems, and as far as problems are concerned, it's a good problem to have, and it is a problem that I have, and I'm very fortunate for that.
Yeah. Well, I remember when you were thinking of leaving, we chatted, and my thought then, and I think it's played out, is you'll be in very high demand.
Oh, thanks. You guys are so kind.
Like you specifically, because you're very good, but also, and maybe this is part two to what we're talking about. As much as policy has gotten more permissive on some of these scales of development, it's still prescriptive enough that you're often going to committee, in which case you need like a skilled planner like you to stick handle that. What pattern are you seeing across these projects? How many of them are you doing like truly as of right, straight to permits versus not?
Oh, geez. I mean, let's put it this way: if they go straight to permits, they don't need me. But which would be great. But
there's still some multiplexes that seem to be doing as of right builds.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing a ton at the bigger scales, but
no, I agree with that. That's what I'm seeing, and oftentimes I'll get involved, at the sort of due diligence stage, the feasibility stage. Sometimes my involvement ends at that point simply because the numbers don't make sense and the projects can't proceed. But in other cases, they do find, you know what, we can make this work. Right. There are a lot of people who are trying to figure out how to do that, specifically because of the costs and the delays associated with subjecting yourself to a planning process. Right. I have had clients who I'm working with them up until a certain point, and then they kind of don't need me, which is great. Yeah. And they go straight to permits.
Which, frankly, that should be the way that planning is designed in the city. Less and less circumstances where you need to look for exceptions, right?
Yeah. And in which case, my involvement is just ensuring, how do we design in such a way that it's compliant?
Yeah,
right.
That's right.
And one thing we're finding on one of our projects in particular, the policy is changing so quickly. Often city staff don't know the latest in the policy. So actually, there's such a need to almost be educating not only the developer, but often the zoning examiner doesn't know the latest change in policy. Yeah. And so being on top of the policy is, as in real time as you are.
Yeah. And it's necessary. And I had just the other day an architect tell me, oh, I had no idea that the 2013 bylaw hadn't been fully consolidated and up to date. And I'm referring to these bylaws that were passed, 6 months ago. We had no idea that this existed.
Yeah.
And that's half the reason that I exist is because, the city.
Well, this is a cautionary tale for people that are trying to do things without a planner is you get this zoning review back from the city and you take it as truth when often there's errors in there because the zoning examiner is not aware of the most recent vote. We had Craig Race on the podcast right before the end of the year, and he was saying, there's so many times where we're flagging issues because, the zoning examiner is just not following, the day-to-day changes in policy.
That's right. Yeah. And literally this morning while I was on my way here, I was emailing a zoning examiner for a project I have downtown, which it's on a major street and incorporates retail at grade, but it's in a neighborhood. Right. And so we've been holding off on resubmitting for a zoning, notice until that E49 piece was approved and enforced. And
the retail and neighborhood stuff.
The retail and neighborhoods. And it just came into force. One of the three pieces was appealed, but two of them went forward. So the major streets piece went forward. It's now enforced in effect, but it's so new. It's so recent that the clerk's department hasn't finalized all the documentation. And so I'm trying to inform the zoning examiner, by the way, these are the new rules as of yesterday.
And I think, some part of the planning department wants to get to a point where there are fewer minor variances being sought. So they do have these monitoring programs where they try to identify what are the most common variances being sought. How could we update the policy to not require variances on those? But then my interpretation is you have this other part of the planning department that just adds a bunch of other things, bike repair, maintenance facilities and stuff like that. And it's just I don't think you're going to be out of work anytime soon. I guess it's a short version of this.
That's true. That's true. That's okay. I've got a backup plan. If that ever does happen, I've got a backup plan.
You become a developer.
I'll become a developer.
Yeah. Absolutely. We wanted to talk for quite some time to talk about policy, but there was one specific committee of adjustments hearing that you went to that grabbed some attention. We have a clip that we'll tee up in a second, but maybe to set it up, tell us a little bit about that project, why you got to committee, and then we'll hear this clip and then we'll talk about it.
Okay, so the project it's located on Pharmacy Avenue. The address is 397 Pharmacy Avenue, and it's a small scale bungalow site, and my client has acquired it and is looking to build a 6-story apartment building. It actually only has 10 units in it, so again, going straight to
no site plan control.
No site plan control, we worked very hard talk about zoning examiners. We worked back and forth with the zoning examiner several times, multiple iterations, just to try to like whittle down the number of variances and the intensity or the extent of the relief that's required in the ones that we do require. And so multiple iterations of design with our architect, Noam Hazan, who's excellent. Reached out to community planning, reached out to transportation services. Proactively, we reached out to the counselor and unfortunately didn't hear back from him until after the deadline to submit materials.
And maybe you don't need to say, but I'll say that's Councillor Candeval, who at some point was on the Planning and Housing Committee. I think it's no longer. And it's funny, Candeval, and again, I'm just speaking for myself. Candeval, I see as someone who like really loves the example of Mandami, New York, keeps referencing him. But, but like Mandami, I have many criticisms of Mandami, but among other things, he's actually pretty good on housing, or has been so far. And Candeval, let's say, is not very good on housing. And sounds like, again, not putting words in your mouth, but he was not helpful to this process.
Well, it's unfortunate because we did reach out proactively before an application was submitted, never heard back from the counselor's office. I then followed up again a couple of weeks prior to the deadline to upload materials, which was a week prior to the hearing. Didn't hear back until, after the deadline, when he actually submitted a letter of opposition.
Right, after the deadline.
After the deadline.
And they accepted it.
And they accepted it. And they wouldn't accept it for me. But they accepted it from him. In Scarborough, just a tale here, word of warning, do not attempt to submit materials prior to the deadline in Scarborough. While they may accept them in Toronto and East York, they do not.
In fact, I submitted a letter for that, and because Noam reached out. Actually, maybe you reached out. I think both of you reached out, and they refused the letter. It's almost like a day late.
So anyway, we worked quite hard to get it as close to the city's intended vision for the major streets policy and regulatory framework as possible. There were a couple, legacy zoning regulations that were the trigger of two of our variances, because where the major streets regulations allow a 6-meter front yard setback, Chapter 900 in this particular case required a 22-meter setback from the original center line, which equals like 8 or 9 meters,
which is insane.
So we required a variance for that. And
to the intended 6 meters that the city's
the citywide policy.
We designed it to the intended 6 meters, which is what the city community planning staff will tell you. That's what their aim is. Right. And so because of that, we also had a variance for a front yard encroachment because it's tied to the setback location. So we had two things that we really couldn't work with. There wasn't much we could do about it. We had a couple other very minor, very technical variances. Community planning went as far as to say in their commentary that it met the 4 tests of a minor variance, which is as close as community planning ever gets.
Can you restate the 4 tests? These are the tests under which committee members should evaluate variance applications.
Yes. So under Section 45 of the Planning Act, there are 4 tests to determine the appropriateness of relief being sought to the zoning bylaw as a minor variance. And so the first is, is it generally in keeping with the intent of the official plan? The second is it generally in keeping with the intent of the zoning bylaw? The third is it a desirable and appropriate use of the land or development? And the final is it minor?
Yes. Right.
Okay. So those are the 4 tests. And so community planning went as far to say, we've assessed this. We feel that it meets the 4 tests of a minor variance. And they will never suggest that the committee of adjustment approve something, but they will say, should you choose to approve this, here are the conditions that we recommend imposing. Transportation services literally did not submit anything. No concern on their part. Urban forestry gave some very standard, conditions, no objections raised by them. And we received unanimous refusal from the Committee of Adjustment.
So maybe before we get into that, let's play this clip.
Sure.
And you could tell us after who's speaking, but I thought this clip, which was sent to me by a mutual friend of ours who may or may not want to be named, was completely outrageous. So let's play the clip.
Okay.
More questions. Let's go into committee. I'm really struggling with this one. I'll be honest. I understand it's an arterial. I understand we want intensification along arterials. But honestly, to shoehorn an apartment building into a lot like this doesn't make any sense to me with no parking. And I understand where staff is at. If we were looking at properties, 3 properties that have been consolidated and a building facing the way apartment buildings usually are, which is this way, unless it's a huge lot, I just in good conscience, I can't support this application. I don't think it meets the four tests, and I do not believe it meets the character of the neighborhood. And I also don't feel it fits with the intent of the intensification of the city. So yeah, I can't support this application.
Madam Chair, can I speak?
Yes, go ahead.
I agree with you. The city has passed some official plan and zoning bylaws that said that they are looking at minor arterial roads everywhere in the city, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of the surroundings, regardless of the infrastructure in place, and that at those locations, they will support a 6-story apartment building. I have a real problem with this as a 6-story apartment building mid-block surrounded by 1- and 2-story bungalows. The proposed apartment building uses up almost the entire lot. When we have a 6-story apartment building backing onto bungalows, we're usually looking at shadow drawings. No shadow drawings. This is what the city has said is desirable. Thankfully, I'm not part of the city. I am an independent committee member. I listen to what the city says. I don't have to always agree. And I agree in general to the overall policy. We need to increase density on a site-specific basis. I don't agree with this one.
So I have a lot to well, maybe you react to that.
So that was, we first heard from Nancy. I believe the pronunciation of her last name is Uman. She's the chair of the Scarborough Committee of Adjustment. And then
that's encouraging.
Yes. And then I believe the second lady, her name Anne Macaulay or
McCarthy.
McCarthy, who's been on the committee for some time, if I understand.
Since the beginning of time, I think. Well, maybe I'll just say, there were a few quotes in there, but
yeah,
they weren't disagreeing or even referencing the relief you were seeking. They were disagreeing with the policy, the as of right policy, the 6-story permissions that exist in policy that was appealed and settled and exists in policy. That is not what they exist to do. That's not their role.
That's my interpretation as well.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. And I actually, if you listen to my full rebuttal in anticipation of this type of response from the committee, I made a point of reminding the committee of what their mandate is.
Mm-hmm.
They did not appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I told them we are not here to debate policy decisions that have already been determined.
Totally.
This is not the place
by council, democratically.
By council.
Yeah.
By council. This is not the forum for that. We are here to talk about the technical implementation of those policies. Another committee member responded to that telling me that he didn't need me to tell him how to do his job.
Well, I think maybe he does.
I'm sorry, maybe I do.
And the chair, again, specifically said that she does not believe it satisfies the 4 tests. You had planning's opinion that it did satisfy the 4 tests. And again, in there's obviously, there was a much longer hearing, but I didn't hear any specific reference to how it did satisfy the 4 tests.
No.
It was just basically this broad rejection of city policy and the idea that because you're on a narrow lot, the building is oriented more so depth-wise than width-wise, which is an aesthetic preference or something, but it's not a policy-driven objection.
No, and the closest I could come up with, and there was no reference to these legacy zoning regulations that we talked about, which I found interesting because that would have actually been the one thing maybe that they could lean on. I thought in any kind of defensible manner, but they opted not to. The thing that I saw, or that what I heard from them, I suppose, out of all that was they're talking about the existing context of bungalows and small 2-story houses and how this 6-story building on a narrow lot was really out of keeping with the character. And so going to section 4.1.5, the official plan, which talks about neighborhood character. Well, exceptions to that have been written into the official plan for major streets, apartment buildings, specifically because they are novel, specifically because they do not form the predominant characteristics of any neighborhood.
The whole point of an upzoning is to permit things that are out of character.
That's right. So the closest I could get in my mind to one of the 4 tests was this idea of it not being and they were talking about it not being appropriate. So not being a desirable and appropriate use of the land or development, but based on their very rigid and narrow interpretation of section 4.1.5 of the official plan, which there are exemptions for major streets.
Just without getting into every technical detail of the design, if I think broadly about the major streets policy, could you broadly fit the design intent? Is this a 25-meter or less deep building? Is this a, appropriate setbacks on this? Like, none of these things came up as variance pushback?
No. So to give you a sense of the variances, so as I mentioned, 2 of them are tied to a Chapter 900 exception for a front yard setback, which would make the site undevelopable.
Well,
if we
8 to 9 meters is obscene. Thinking about small apartment buildings.
Yeah, and we just don't have the depth to work with.
And it's not good city building.
No. There were variances for visitor parking, because the bylaw says you can't have front yard parking. And there is nowhere else to put the parking. So, and we were shoehorning it around a bus stop, which by the way is directly abutting the property. So a driveway wrapped around a bus stop, and we designed to accessible standards 1 visitor parking space. But the fact that it was in the front of the building was non-compliant. To the depth. So Matt was asking about the depth. So we required minor relief to the depth, but it was like a meter. It was like, and it was because it was a narrow site. And of course, I don't want to be giving the committee ammunition. I'm not going to tell them it's a constrained or a narrow site, but we required minor relief from the zoning bylaw to facilitate, unit layouts and circulation elements in
that's
a
why this
compact
process
form.
Exists.
Well, for what it's worth, if they chose to disagree with those variances that you were seeking, they could have made that the substance of their.
They could have.
I don't agree with the meter extra you're
exactly.
looking for. I don't agree with the parking variance you're looking for. Right?
And they opted not to.
They said, I don't want a 6-foot wall next to a bungalow.
6-story wall,
6-story.
And because it's a relatively deep lot, we still were able to achieve the 7.5 meter rear yard setback, which I would think is the most important thing.
Totally.
Right?
Absolutely.
And you talk
in the context of mid-rise buildings, that is the only thing, right? 7.5 meters off the rear, right?
Exactly. So, there was like something with, the bicycle storage we tried to resolve. And I think we actually eliminated a couple of those variances. So it came down to like 6 technical variances, 2 of which were tied to Chapter 900 exceptions, and they were all very minor.
So this is obviously a big problem because, as we mentioned, as the city moves to make the bylaw in some ways more permissive, it is also making them more prescriptive. There's a lot more specific things you need to adhere to, which just means that the need for committee of adjustment is often becoming more likely. That system breaks down if committee doesn't know what its role is, what it's supposed to adjudicate, and how it's supposed to evaluate these applications.
That's right.
So you have some thoughts on reform, because I've attended many committee of adjustments hearings, many bad ones, and this is maybe the worst in terms of just like how explicit they were against just refusing to go with what city planning wants.
Can I ask a technical question on these committee members, maybe for my education, but also just for people listening? Like, one, how are they selected? How long do they sit on committee? And is there anything equivalent to sort of like penalties or consequences if they misuse their role? Like, is there a mechanism designed into the committee of adjustments that addresses these types of circumstances?
These are all good questions. So there is an application process.
Okay.
I don't know the particulars of the application process, but what I do understand is that the appointments are in council terms, so 4-year periods, and new appointments are made at the beginning of a new council term, like after an election. And there are certain requirements, but from my understanding, they're pretty open-ended.
And you know who makes the appointment? Who decides?
There's I forget the name of it. There's a selections committee. There's like an appointments sort of selections committee that's currently it's run by Lily Chang. That
appointments across the city, not just this,
right. but including the committee of adjustment.
And my understanding is because, again, like if you get refused at committee, one of the recourse options you have is to appeal at TLAB. And there's nothing tying back. If certain committee members keep refusing applications that get approved at TLAB, in an ideal world, that would lead to some introspection and maybe reevaluation of those committees. They're not like doing what they're supposed to do. But my understanding is there's no kind of loop to that.
That's also my understanding. And again, I'm just starting to look into this. I don't know if I can call myself an expert on this or not, but the municipal code sets out sort of the rules and the regulations and the governance sort of structure of the Committee of Adjustment. So there's an opportunity if there's an opportunity for reform, it is through Chapter 4 of the Toronto Municipal Code.
Okay.
And to answer your question, Matt, my understanding is that there are opportunities to be more specific in specifying things like minimum qualifications for applicants, for clarifying roles and responsibilities, clarifying mandate. There's opportunities beyond Chapter 4, just I think for additional training, and things like that. And to the best of my understanding, to your question, there is no clear set of ramifications if a committee member should operate outside their mandate and be demonstrated to do so on an ongoing basis. So there doesn't appear to be any recourse, at least not to the best of my understanding. And I feel we are well within our rights to suggest that this is an appointment process. These people have obligations to uphold. We should hold them accountable.
Absolutely.
Well, they respond. They answer to council, and council is accountable to us as voters, right?
That's right.
And so, the fact that mechanism is not perfectly tied, it does seem like this has gained some attention in the community and probably among some members of council.
I believe
it's a good start, because this all of a sudden starts to raise the question of maybe it is time to consider reform, right? So,
it is. And on the note, I'll just add the whole portfolio of Committee of Adjustment up until very, very, very recently, like a couple of weeks ago, under city planning. It was very recently moved to development review, which I see as a positive, just because Valencia has now just very recently left, and
Build Canada Homes,
and Oren's taking over, at least on an interim basis, although I feel he's a good candidate to take it over permanently.
I think Oren's great. Yeah.
I see that as a positive because there have been a lot of reforms under Valencia's leadership, and maybe we're not seeing the results of all that quite yet, a lot of those things, but she's pushing things in the right direction.
Totally.
And I feel, my sense is that under the development review sort of oversight, I feel like there probably is already an intent to reform to some degree.
Right.
I would imagine.
Do you have a sense of what that reform could look like? You mentioned things like better training, better selection, more clarification of what their role is and is not. Is it like things along those lines, or do you have other thoughts as to what they should be looking at?
Yeah, well, along those lines, I think certain committee members need to be reminded of their obligation to uphold those 4 tests and of what the city's policies and regulations actually call for. Like there seems to be a bit of a disconnect between what the policies and regulations say and maybe even the understanding of committee members. And I mean, maybe part of that is just because the amount of change that's happened so quickly, like the pace of it and the extent of it too, right?
If you've been on committee for seemingly 50 years, this is all incredibly dramatic, transformative change.
It's huge. It's huge.
Right.
Like if you're used to dealing with like small scale additions and rear decks and sheds, and then all of a sudden the variances are coming in for 6-story apartment buildings. I mean,
it does beg the question of is the committee being misused in these broader contexts of policy, right?
Perhaps.
Perhaps one of the big things that has come up before as part of a potential reform package, and this exists in other municipalities, is the idea of delegated authority. So maybe tell us what delegated authority is, what that would look like, and your thoughts on it.
Sure. So again, I'm not like a super expert in this either, but based on my understanding, as I'm starting to sort of dig into this a little bit, the Planning Act, well, first of all, the Planning Act already allows us to delegate decision-making authority over zoning bylaw applications, but zoning bylaw amendment applications. So basically, rather than a full-blown rezoning process, which authority has been delegated to City Council, and alternatively, the Committee of Adjustment process where authority has been delegated to the committee. There's the potential for a third stream here, and other jurisdictions have looked into this for, quote, minor rezonings, where we could actually delegate authority to staff, city planning staff, or community planning staff, to address, technical variances for things like this, for things that don't neatly fit into either bucket. Because like right now, I think I'm learning that the Committee of Adjustment might not be quite prepared to deal with this kind of this scale and intensity of development and this amount of change. But there are a lot of projects where so that's a consideration, scale and intensity of development. But the other thing is like there are a lot of projects that maybe even from a professional's perspective doesn't even may not meet the 4 tests of a minor variance. There may be too many variances. The scope of relief required might not confidently meet those 4 tests. But then the barrier to entry for like a full-blown zoning bylaw amendment is tremendous. Like the costs, I don't need to tell you guys, application costs alone
at this scale, it's a deal killer.
For any small builder, they're never going to do this, right? Like it's going to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. But so, there's an argument to be made for save the full-blown zoning bylaw amendment process for instances where the policy is being changed or determined, like you're changing the permitted building typology. You're dramatically increasing the permitted height, that kind of stuff. That sort of sets the policy, right? And save this, create a third stream where you're not doing that. You're working to implement the policy. You're not changing from an R to a CR zone. It's like, what can we do within the context of the regulations that are already anticipated?
That's right.
But maybe where the relief is required to the extent that it might not qualify as a minor variance. That is the missing middle of the approvals process. Is totally. This, and it's the type of thing that would uniquely, I think, benefit small scale developers and builders who are trying to build the missing middle, because it's like sometimes we need relief, and it's these Chapter 900 exceptions alone could be, like there are Chapter 900 exceptions, for example, on major streets, which limit FSI to 0.6. That
the ability to build a major streets building.
How can you possibly build an apartment building?
That's right.
And how can you possibly defend against that as being minor?
That's right.
Right? Like
and stepping back, I mean, that's a good example. To me, part of this is there's still some policy change needed, because some of this is just like remnants of overlapping policies that haven't been cleaned up.
That's right.
And then so now you take some of these like contradictory policies and then you put that in front of a committee that is, ill-equipped to deal with this scale of change. And you're just getting the worst of both sides. Right? So naturally, you want city council to clean up these leftover policies that need to be cleaned up.
Yes, I do.
And then you want the committee to play its role where appropriate, but not play the role where not appropriate.
Exactly.
It's interesting. When we started this podcast, we did an episode on the 91 Barton Committee of Adjustments hearing. So if anybody wants to search for it, the title was Anatomy of the Committee of Adjustment Hearing. And a lot of the feedback we saw from people after that hearing was that committee needs to be abolished or reformed. And my thought back then was more so that it was actually more of a policy issue. I didn't think committee was going that far off in interpreting policy. Policy was too restrictive. So in that case, I thought the big bottleneck was policy. In this case, the bottleneck is the committee. So this has kind of brought us full circle where we actually need both. But in this case, it's clearly the committee, because as you mentioned, in this third stream of delegated authority to planning staff, you already effectively got planning's blessing on your plan. So this would have avoided the committee process, the uncertainty that comes with, frankly, untrained, ill-equipped people evaluating these applications, but also it removes one of the political elements to these things, because under a delegated authority framework, my understanding at least is you're not having open deputations. You don't have the counselor showing up. The counselor obviously could call whoever he wants and share his opinion, but it's not this public process where it could be used as a grandstanding opportunity or anything like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So we should do that.
Well, and I like it as well, because it encourages, like through the committee process right now, like one of the things that's missing is like you don't actually know who's assigned to your file until you submit an application to the committee of adjustment, and then it's you're working against the clock. To meet with that person, address any concerns. Like this would remove all of that, and
there's less opportunity for back and forth.
There is
design compromise and receiving feedback and implementing feedback.
Totally.
You're at the hearing, you get denied. Now it's like, well, now I got to get back
deferred.
in queue to go back to the committee. Months of waiting.
Or you got to request deferral, or and you can have like high level conversations before you apply to the committee, but you don't know if you're talking to the person who's going to review and provide comments on your file or somebody else, right? So if you remove that, you're actually encouraging a better working relationship between staff and the applicants, right? And hopefully towards generating better outcomes too,
If you had to speculate, Why do you because this does exist in other parts of the province?
Yes, it does.
We mentioned Halton Hills.
Yep.
Why does it not exist here? Is it just that like this hasn't been that big of an issue? Because as you mentioned, until now, most variance applications were for like, patio setback, encroachments and stuff like that. Why do you think we don't have this? Is there like some sort of structural opposition within either planning or council or the mayor's office?
That's a good question.
I'm just speculating.
I'm speculating. We're all speculating. I think it's the former. I think we're only kind of now getting to the point where the policies are no longer the problem, as you say.
Yeah.
Now it's like, do we actually have the right process in place to handle these policies, right? Yeah. And we're dealing with a scale and intensity of development that is novel.
Yeah.
And it has unique challenges and issues, as you both know very well.
Totally.
Not just from a planning perspective, but from like a feasibility, from a constructability perspective, right? Everything. And it's the same thing with site plan control. Like we probably need, a right size site plan process for something of this scale, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is no different. I think this is just talking about process. Like the process isn't designed to respond to this.
Yeah.
And now that we have meaningfully addressed, significantly anyway, the policy issues.
Yeah.
I think, now it's
more process stuff.
Yeah. And a good example of that process that I think is an unintended consequence of some of these policy changes is we've got an application where we're both going through committee of adjustments and site plan approval.
Yeah.
And it feels like these two processes were never really designed to coexist. Like one is run by city staff, one is this sort of like uncertainty as you go into committee.
Yeah.
Versus like the zoning bylaw amendment process followed by site plan approval. Like these are sort of like intentional sequences.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden you've got this weird sort of Frankenstein where you're, building a major streets building, you got to go committee for approvals, but it's more than 10 units, and you got to go through site plan. And
you have planning telling you, as they have with us, wait for first comments before you go to committee.
Yeah, creating all this sort of like chicken or egg problem.
Yeah.
And it frankly, I think there's a tipping point. We probably are flirting with it on our project where you're actually better off just going to zoning bylaw because you're already doing a lot of that work anyways for site plan.
Yeah.
And there's a little bit more clarity and certainty dealing with city staff on a zoning question than there is with this sort of like ambiguous committee process.
That's right.
But the problem becomes most people won't want to do either, and they'll just scale their projects down.
Yeah,
that's right.
And we're seeing that across the board on major street sites where they're just scaling them down.
And one of the committee members in this hearing mentioned, hey, if this had been 3 lots that were, assembled together and
wouldn't that be nice?
Proper apartment building. Problem is now you're triggering site plan approval because 3 lots would have been more than 10.
And then I'm sure like you can't afford the assembly.
Yeah.
To make it work.
That's right.
One thing that's interesting is the province obviously has the idea of minor variances kind of slowing the process up on their radar because they did pass these rules to allow auto approval on variances within 10% on setbacks.
Setbacks only. Yeah.
On setbacks only.
The 90% rule.
I think the province kind of like implementing this delegated authority track from on top would do more to get us to address this problem.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah. So maybe that's something we need to talk to our friends in the province about.
Sure. I mean, as far as I'm aware, I think the only thing that we need to do is write language in the official plan that permits delegation.
Yeah.
So I think we have the control municipally to do this because the Planning Act already allows it, but the province could force it down everybody's throat if they wanted to.
And my sense is because when the province forces things on the city, it's always this kind of like dialogue with the mayor's office. I don't see why the mayor's office would have a big problem with this.
No.
So I don't even think it would be like an adversarial
but then
forcing.
It sort of begs the question, why not do it?
I think it's probably just not on their radar yet.
Well, hopefully it will be.
Well, now
I might have.
Yeah. No, totally. What I mean is until this.
Gage, the feedback out of this, have you heard anything directly, indirectly in terms of council's reaction to this issue? And do you think there's support for the broad idea of time to take a look?
I can't get into specifics. I'd be speaking out of turn, but to answer the question, I know that it's on council's radar,
right.
And I know that it's something that they've been talking about internally. I also know that the committee of adjustment is feeling a little bit of heat from some of the publicity that they've.
As they should. Well, one argument for still sticking to a provincial path is the mayor has indicated so far that she's not willing to use her strong mayor powers, which means you need a majority of council to vote for a change along these lines. councilors love committee of adjustments because it's their opportunity to drum up their constituents, to be the hero, to be the, I like to say it's like the Ralph Nader, like whatever character, like fighting the big corporations. It's like it's a pulpit that they have, or a platform.
Well, this actually raises another question because I think you've seen, and there are a few councillors who refuse to participate in committee of adjustments processes, which to me should almost be a matter of policy. Because I think the broader issue is that the committee is becoming a political
problem is,
right?
For it to be a matter of policy, council has to agree with it, and the councillors that don't want it to be a policy won't agree with that.
Because ultimately, like you're going to
unless the province kind of like sets it.
As I understand it, the intent of committee is sort of like a group of citizens that have some knowledge on these issues that are weighing in, sort of like a jury in a court, right? And then all of a sudden, you intentionally eliminate the politics from that. Except, as in your case, the city councilor will write a letter of opposition.
And probably timed it to be maximally politically effective.
It was completely intentional. I totally agree with that. So here's my take on it. And it sounds like you two are on the same page. If we have delegated authority to the Committee of Adjustment, let's not let our politicians intervene in a way that may influence the outcome.
Absolutely.
Right? They have no business doing that.
No, they don't.
should not be doing
it. And I'll say on our project that we're working with you on here in the Junction, this is the feedback we got from Perks' office, which I thought was great. Gord Perks, as a matter of principle, says, I do not intervene in committee of adjustment.
Thank you, Gord.
And there are not enough councillors that take that position that I think should be a lot more common.
That's right.
Absolutely.
That's right.
I don't know if you had any last notes on committee reform. I got a couple other things I wanted to get your thoughts on.
I don't know. I mean, we've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe this kind of like ties in a little bit to this idea of delegated authority, but it's delegated to a different party.
Okay.
We talked briefly before we started recording. The province today dropped a proposal for new regulations that would allow professional engineers to deem any submission materials for OPA, ZBA, site plan control applications as complete themselves. For people who aren't very familiar with this process, if you're applying for an official plan amendment, zoning bylaw amendment, or site plan control, you have a checklist from the city of materials that need to be submitted. Those materials are prepared by your consultants. They're then submitted. The city has time to review them all and deem them as complete or incomplete. And one of the reasons why this matters a lot, among other things, is that the city has timelines that they have to adhere to for decisions.
Yes.
And the clock doesn't start until they deem it complete. So what you're seeing often, and I don't mean to ascribe too much malice, but you're just seeing it practically speaking, is the deem complete is really dragged out, and it gives them all this time that's not on the clock that still has the effect of delaying development.
That's right.
So you said you didn't get a chance to see that, but like that general idea, like what do you think about it? It's again, it's delegating authority in this case to professional engineers to say, like, my functional service report is complete.
I mean, if we're talking about, engineers who have their stamp and they understand all the requirements, I don't see anything wrong with it. But, the other piece of that is, and we talked a little bit about, this earlier before we started recording, is half the problem there is just staff coming back with comments that are not clearly grounded in their own terms of reference.
Absolutely.
So
not being clear about what they want
to see. And then using the opportunity to respond with commentary to delay the process, as you say. So clarity in the terms of reference
would be helpful.
And
this would actually, I think this would give them an incentive, because right now there is no incentive to be all that clear because they could just deem incomplete.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I agree with that. I think yes. So delegating authority to engineers to deem materials complete on their own, I think lights a fire under staff a little bit to ensure that they're being extremely clear in their requirements, and hopefully that clarifies things, and hopefully it expedites the process so that we eliminate that aspect of it. And it quite often is the engineering pieces that tie things up. Too.
I think it gives them an incentive to be clear as to what they want to see, but also gives them an incentive to not overdo it, because then they'll have professional engineers saying, like, we don't need this. We got a deemed incomplete on one of our projects, primarily for our civil reports, and our civil consultant told us half of the items, they had never been requested to do this in the past. So they're working off their past experience dealing with the city. And if it's that unpredictable, there's just no way to guard against it.
That's a problem.
And for us, what that means in practice is probably a 6-week, maybe 8-week delay. And this is kind of like servicing costs. This is all sorts of things. Yeah. So to me, this sounds, I think it's a relatively minor change, but I think it's a good one. And it sets us in a direction where you have fewer bottlenecks, which is ultimately what we need.
I agree. I think it's great.
Yeah.
Now, you made the comment earlier about a lot of this stuff comes down to process, including this. But what's your sense of where these process changes are on Jason Thorne's radar, as well as just the city more broadly? Is there a deliberate effort to be evaluating process within the city, or is it really waiting for the province to force the city's hands to do things like simplify the requirements in a site plan application or whatever the case may
Well,
be?
I have to give a lot of credit to Jason, honestly, and his team. I have great admiration for Jason. Honestly, I'm very glad that he's taking on this position. I'm also fortunate to have been able to have some conversations with him, and I'm confident, and I know that these things are on his radar. I don't think it's I don't think this is not a planning specific concern. I think really this is item number 7 or 8 on a long list of priorities.
Yeah.
Right.
The top one of which is developing zoning for the MTSAs
Yeah.
under a very tight timeline and having to reallocate staff from different parts of planning just to focus on it because
Yeah.
it's such a huge
Yeah,
thing.
the deadline they were given was pretty short.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's on his to-do list. He, I have every confidence that he understands the need for these things.
Yeah.
That it's a priority. He's incredibly smart. I have every reason to believe that he understands these things, and shares the concerns that we're expressing, without speaking on his behalf. But that would be my expectation. And I have every reason to believe that it would be his intention to resolve these things. But something like, say, resolving Chapter 900 exceptions for major streets, a set of policies and regulations would typically happen at the end of like a 2-year monitoring and review process with recommendations to council. It would be like a year or 2 down the road that we would see this, right? If anything, I'm just hoping we can expedite it because my concern is just, that we're losing momentum.
Yeah.
We're talking about creating an entire development ecosystem here around novel typologies.
Yeah.
If no one can get them off the ground,
They're going to go do something else.
right?
Matt's going to go back to tech. Yeah. Or something.
Yeah. Please don't. We need you here.
They don't make it easy. Let's say. Yeah.
They do not make it easy, but that's my fear is loss of momentum.
Yeah.
There's all this energy, the missing middle.
Well, and we saw
all this stuff.
we saw this, and I think to the credit that we've gotten this feedback so much talking to folks building multiplexes.
Yeah.
It really feels like where we saw that momentum really get crystallized is in the multiplex world.
Yes.
Where now all of a sudden you have a large number of very specialized boutique development shops that are doing multiplexes across the city because to a certain extent you can do a lot of them still within broadly as of right permissions. And it actually started turning into this really positive flywheel where you had people are onto their 40th multiplex in some cases. That's right. So to do that at this scale is still missing because this scale, let's say the major street scale, this sort of 6-story, 10 to 60 units, is a very challenging scale.
It's challenging, but I think there's interest. Like my client for 397 Pharmacy, company called Tristone Partners, I'm working with them on 7 of these in Scarborough.
Yeah,
and they're all about ready to be submitted to committee of adjustment. And they want to do several of these every year. And I've talked to others who want to do the same that haven't quite taken the plunge yet because they want to see what happens. I've also talked to people, at large firms like real estate firms who are interested in, or development firms that are interested in branching out at this scale because the larger projects just don't pencil anymore. It's both sides. It's large teams diversifying and it's new entrants
working their way up. One thing that's worth mentioning, because this is our scale, and what a lot of these delays and this uncertainty and this process does is it just pushes us to need a higher revenue number. And what that means, from an affordability perspective, is if we don't think we could get really high rents, we don't do the project. And if the process were easier, if it were quicker, and if our costs were lower, we could do this in parts of the city with lower rents. And that is a city objective, to have more housing that is affordable to people in different parts of the city. This pushes it all this uncertainty we're talking about, it's fine if you're building in Forest Hill. But it's basically not fine if you're building in Scarborough or Etobicoke because you're not getting enough value. And what the city should understand, and committee and everyone else, is that you're just making anything other than very expensive luxury housing basically impossible. And that should not be what we want, right?
Well, and that's the thing that kills me about this is, talk about intent of the official plan, intent of the zoning bylaw. The intent of the EHON initiative, broadly speaking, was to distribute development to diversify housing options in neighborhoods and create new opportunities for people to live in neighborhoods where they don't currently exist.
Yes,
It's about equity.
absolutely.
It's about
Totally.
equality.
Absolutely.
And so like that all gets lost
It
when
does.
what you're saying is happening, right?
Yeah.
Like it's nuts.
For what it's worth, like, although this is contrary to the brand that most people ascribe to developers, we actually would prefer to see a project pencil at a much lower rent number because it reflects less risk for us. Because what happens when you say, hey, I think I could rent this for $5 a square foot, you're speculating that market will be there when the building's complete. But to say I want to rent this at $350 a square foot or $375 a square foot, that market exists. You know it's there.
Yeah.
There's way less sort of speculative risk on the pro forma
That's
to
right.
hope that person that can afford that $2,700 one bedroom exists in the
That's
future.
right.
If I'm renting a $2,200 one bedroom, I know that person exists. They're all over the city, right? So that big difference, I think you'd see a lot of developers sort of flooding into this segment of the market if it was realistic.
Yeah, which is what we say we want.
Yeah.
Which is what, yeah. So maybe we'll end on one other kind of like minor point that'd be good to have you weigh in on. I think it was a couple of weeks ago. There was this kind of like, I don't know if I'm naming it correctly, but basically like enhancements to the tree preservation and soft landscaping preservation parts of the bylaw.
Yeah.
And a couple of things, well, two specific things stood out to me as being unhelpful to housing development, to multi-unit infill development. The first was codifying in the official plan that preservation of the tree canopy is a priority. And the problem with having multiple priorities is that they often work across purposes. And then the second one was clarifying, this was already basically the interpretation, but clarifying further that permeable pavers do not count as soft landscaping. Especially when you're dealing with small apartment buildings, you have these soft landscaping requirements, including on a project of ours where it's very relevant, is 1.5 meters along either side property line. And when we're thinking about how to lay out these buildings, you want primary windows. So you want units facing the front, units facing the back. So if you can, you want to put your core in the middle. And if you can, you want a side access.
That's right.
You can't put a walkway, even with permeable pavers that address all the stormwater runoff concerns the city has without a variance because you're on that soft lands. So like you could get as specific as you want to get, but just this general idea where one part of the city, broadly defined, is pushing to make these more possible, more economic, faster, predictable, and everything else.
Yeah.
And another part of the city, for other reasons, is making them harder to build. And it's kind of like we need some like clarity of mission here.
And like to sort of preface my response, I would say like I don't think any of us are under the illusion that tree preservation is not already a priority of the city.
It's worth mentioning that every time we remove a tree, we have a 3-to-1 replacement obligation.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's also worth saying that I don't know any developer that has a problem with that.
No.
Because you can do cash and lieu. That's fine.
That's good. And frankly, everybody wants trees on their property.
And people want trees.
Yeah. So, I take an old tree down, I put 3 new trees. Yeah. Guess what? 50 years from now, we got 3 old trees.
Exactly.
And 3 trees is more than 1 tree, right? So why are they making out? So, and like, what arborists will sometimes say is like, well, 1 mature tree is better than 3 saplings. Fine. But like time passes, right? 3 trees is still more than 1 tree.
Yeah.
But one thing that's actually maybe worth adding to this, Craig Race made this point. If you look at a lot of the letters that were submitted in support of these changes, most of them, I think he ran this through like an AI, mentioned multiplex specifically. And it's very hard to interpret this as anything other than a poison pill for multiplex development.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
I agree. And like the other thing is like laneway suites and garden suites
very difficult to get approval to remove a tree, right?
Tend to run into this a lot, and they make it very difficult to remove a tree. So I agree. I feel like it wasn't a necessary step to codify it in the official plan. Like we already knew that.
Yeah.
Now we're just creating another level of barrier, right? Talk about committee. We're giving committee an excuse not to permit something.
Totally.
Right.
And on the soft landscaping thing, again, it's these. Now it's more than dual mandates. It's like there's too many mandates because originally the soft landscaping requirement was rationalized on the grounds of stormwater infiltration.
Yes.
You could satisfy that with permeable pavers.
Now it's aesthetic.
Well, it's aesthetic, but it's also like biodiversity and all these other things. And at some point, you have to let a city be a city, right?
Yes. And related, and I'll come back to that, but related to that, and I'm sure you probably know this, window wells.
Yeah.
Don't count as soft landscaping.
They no longer count.
Despite the fact that they are permeable.
That's right. Yeah. Pools no longer count. Despite pools hitting water.
So apparently they don't count, right? So there are all these things that achieve the original intent.
Yeah.
of the regulation, of the policy, as you described, that don't count.
Yeah.
And where is it? Again, like it is this scale where we are noticing it. It's the site constraints, right? It's exactly the situation you're describing. It's maybe it doesn't need to be an accessible walkway, but you need like a 0.9 meter walkway on one side of next to your waste room, next to your scissor stair in your most compact version of your building. And a lot of times, in order to not achieve a variance, you're really sacrificing extremely valuable floor area that is very difficult to give up. So it makes a heck of a lot more sense to request the variance.
That's right.
But
then you run into this issue.
And to your point, like, you can design walkways to be permeable and to achieve the intent. So, like, why shouldn't it count?
Is actually crazy because, again, what you're sacrificing now is natural light for livable units in basements.
Well, they don't want them in the basements. They don't want basement units.
But again, what are we trying to do here? Do we want more housing for people?
Well, that's the thing. And on the major street scale, to deliver products that are affordable to the average person in the inner suburbs like Scarborough and Etobicoke, my clients have to include basement units.
We do too. And actually, it's funny you say they don't want basements. They also don't want too much height.
No,
so it's kind of like we're getting pinched on all sides here.
But they want quality of living conditions.
Well, it's worth mentioning.
That's right. I find them actually less worried about the experience and the livability of the unit for the tenants. Which is like, that should be part of the picture here. It's like,
usually about the neighbors.
It's about the neighbors.
It's about the neighbors.
It's worth mentioning that, all this policy is great, but it creates incentives for, call it like gray area behavior. You're seeing people cut down trees without permits. You're seeing people kill trees. You're seeing people put pavers after the zoning's been approved. They'll put pavers down in landscaping areas. So you're not solving the problem because people are going to act in the common sense, self-interested way they're going to act, regardless of what the policy says. But you're just forcing people through these hoops. I mean, we're hearing stories of people going through, if I submit a permit for a single detached home, I can get my tree removed. Once my tree's removed, I'll pull that permit back and I'll submit a permit for a multiplex. What problem have we solved?
Exactly.
We're just creating hoops for people to jump through.
Exactly. We people are crafty enough that they will always find, a way around something, right?
That's right.
And what are we achieving by doing this? Well, to your point, I mean, the behavior is going to continue. It's going to be done through different ways that are less desirable, in fact, and that we can't enforce.
That's right.
And it's going to be done outside of permitting processes, and we don't have the enforcement capacity to manage that.
So, and if we had perfect enforcement, it would be worse because we'd get less housing.
That's right.
So and again,
it all translates to higher rents at the end of the day. It all translates to cost. It all needs to convert into revenue someday. So it's all higher.
My sense, and this kind of goes back to I think everything we talked about, is there are different parts of the city that are each going for their own objective and mandate, and there's no one trying to create. There's a lack of understanding of trade-offs.
Yes.
And trade-offs exist everywhere in life and in the world. And if you don't have someone that could adjudicate the trade-offs and say, actually, this priority is more important than that priority, then you just get this kind of like mishmash of policy.
More trees, but less housing. More tree canopy, but less housing.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
So I mean, let's end on a positive note.
Okay.
What positive thing do you have to say? And
what are you excited about? Optimistic about?
These are all implementation and process challenges to a generally good policy direction.
That's what I was going to say. We are moving in the right direction.
We are.
Like after years and years and years of just talking about, like, I remember when the city's policy was no house behind a house. It wasn't that long ago.
That's right. Yeah.
And it'll never be enough. It'll never be fast enough. It'll never be free of hiccups or other issues, but it is painful to watch. It's painful to experience, but we are slowly getting where we say we want to go.
Yeah.
And the very fact that we're having this conversation about the policy actually is no longer the major issue.
Yeah.
That's a huge thing.
That is a huge thing
on its own, isn't it? Now we need to address. There are always going to be other issues.
Tree canopy requirement.
Except for the tree canopy. But like in terms of like enabling the housing typologies, I just mean like the EHON stuff. Like we have come so far in even just like 5 years.
Totally.
On that, right?
Yeah.
And stuff like this tree thing, I mean, could be short-lived, right? Like it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
That's right.
I mean, with a critical mass of case studies presented to the city saying, look, guys, this policy has become problematic. Here's the evidence. With another council, in another year, I mean, that
In a
might be-
non-election year.
in a
which is
non-election year,
helpful. Yeah.
in a non-election year, I mean, these things do get revisited, right?
Yeah. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
maybe we'll end there. I think that a big part of having these things be revisited is for people who have the expertise that you do to speak
Sure.
out publicly and loudly about it, which you do to your great credit. So thank you for
So
everything you
let's
do.
hope Ed McCarthy doesn't get reappointed to the committee. Of
We'll keep an eye on
Justice.
that.
We'll keep an eye
No
on the
comment.
We'll write her name on a champagne bottle and we'll pop it if
He doesn't make it back to the Scarborough committee.
yeah. Anyway,
I can see
Okay.
that it's time for to retire.
Yeah.
Anyways.
thanks for coming.
Thank you for having
Thanks,
me,
Blair.
guys.
Cheers.
Thanks.